The she-wolf gave her baby to a retired soldier. What he did next was incredible. An ordinary man living a quiet life in a remote place with no big expectations. When an unbelievable situation happens right in front of his eyes, something you could never predict, something that challenges your understanding of the world. That's exactly what happened to a retired soldier. He was no longer seeking glory, battles, or adventures. He just wanted peace. But life, many times, surprises us in ways we never imagined. And that's where a wolf comes in. Yes, you read that right, a wolf. This is not a fantasy story or a legend. A real wolf, with an act so uncommon that no one could predict it. The soldier would never have imagined that an encounter with a wild animal would change his life forever. John had always been a man of action. He was born in a time when discipline and courage were the most valued qualities, and he grew up with the firm purpose of serving his country. From a young age, he knew his destiny was tied to war. When he enlisted, he had no idea the hardships he would face. For years, he lived in the battlefields, dealing with the adversities of combat and the painful losses of friends and comrades. The scars he carried, both physical and emotional, were a reflection of the countless battles he had fought. Over the years, John became a war veteran. Each mission, each battle, seemed like an extension of the last, until finally, the exhaustion, not just physical, but mental, began to weigh on him. He saw his life passing in a sequence of endless wars, and it was during one of these conflicts that he realized his journey, the way he knew it, was coming to an end. After retiring, John sought something he had never had during his military career: peace. He wanted the tranquility that war had never offered him. He moved away from the world of cities and people, retreating to a small house in the middle of a dense forest. It was there, in isolation, that he hoped to find what he had longed for. Solitude seemed to be the key to his healing. In the first few days, the change was difficult. He, who had spent his whole life in constant motion, now found himself stuck in a routine of silence and reflection. The peace he had longed for had a bitter taste, as the war and its ghosts still haunted his thoughts. He tried to fill the emptiness with walks through the forest, smelling the wet earth and listening to the sound of leaves in the wind. But the silence, no matter how pleasant, only emphasized the hole in his chest. What he was truly seeking was a way to reconnect with himself, to heal the wounds that time and war hadn't healed. But as time went on, something began to change. The daily walks, the contact with nature, the absence of any external agitation or pressure began to bring a sense of lightness that he hadn't felt in years. He started to notice the small details around him, the movement of the trees, the animals on the trails, the change in seasons. It was as if, somehow, nature had embraced him, offering him something he couldn't find anywhere else: a new purpose. Still, no matter how hard he tried to get used to the tranquility of his new life, John knew something was still missing. He didn't know what, but he felt that the emptiness inside him wouldn't be filled just by the peaceful silence of the forest. He was searching for something bigger, something he couldn't define, but somehow knew it was still to come. And it was on one of those solitary days, while exploring the forest, that he came across a scene that would change his life forever. Something he never imagined could happen. Something that seemed like a message from a world he didn't fully understand. It was a quiet morning, the kind of morning that seemed to last forever. The sun had barely started to peek through the trees, painting the sky with a soft golden hue. John was sitting on the porch of his house, watching the horizon, his thoughts drifting aimlessly. Solitude had become a constant companion, but little by little, he was getting used to the quiet. He took a deep breath, feeling the freshness of the forest around him, when something made him stop. A distant sound, almost imperceptible, caught his attention. It was a strange movement in the woods. The wind wasn't strong enough to shake the trees, and the bird's song had suddenly stopped. What was that? He stood up, alert, a survival instinct still active inside him despite his years of retirement. Something was different, and then he saw her. There, among the trees, an imposing figure emerged from the morning mist. It was a wolf. Her dense, silver fur seemed to glow under the soft light of dawn, and her eyes, piercing and wise, were fixed on him. She didn't seem aggressive, but there was something in her stance that conveyed silent confidence, as if she were afraid of nothing, not even him. The soldier stood still, watching, not knowing what to do. Slow and steady, the wolf's paws touched the ground with an almost supernatural grace as she approached. John felt a mix of surprise and curiosity wash over him. What was a wolf doing so close to a human home, especially one as isolated as his? The tension in the air grew as she got closer. There was no sign of aggression, but there was something unusual about her presence. She seemed to be at peace, but at the same time, there was an urgency in her movements. John felt a wave of apprehension, but something inside him urged him not to move, to watch. The wolf stopped just a few meters from John, and for a moment, they stared at each other. Her eyes shone with an intensity that made him feel as though he were being evaluated by something far wiser than he had ever imagined. She didn't seem to fear his presence. On the contrary, there was an absolute confidence in her posture. And then, something even stranger happened. The wolf crouched down, and in a gesture that seemed deliberate, she looked directly at him, as if challenging him to do something. Without hesitation, she slowly moved away, and with one last glance, turned to leave. But before she got too far, something unexpected happened. She stopped again, this time looking at what she had brought with her. A pup, still small, with its eyes half open, began to move shyly and slowly toward the soldier. The wolf, with surprising gentleness, nudged the pup toward John, leaving it right in front of him. And there, in the heart of the forest, with the wolf's eyes fixed on him, the soldier felt a mix of confusion and an indescribable sense of responsibility. The wolf looked directly at him once again, not with fear, but with unwavering confidence. She was entrusting him with something valuable, something that seemed more than just a simple pup. It was a silent request. What did the wolf expect from him? What motivated this unusual gesture, this act of trust? Why, of all places, would she choose this man to entrust the life of her pup? The soldier, unsure of what to do, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He knew this was not just a simple encounter. It was something deeper, something that challenged everything he knew about nature, about animals, and even about himself. The wolf hadn't just chosen him. She had invited him to be a part of something bigger. The wolf gave him one last glance, as if waiting for a response. And then, with silent elegance, she moved away, disappearing into the forest, leaving the soldier and the pup alone in the field, surrounded by the vastness of nature. John stood there, motionless, holding the small pup in his arms, still trying to understand what had just happened. What did that gesture mean? Why him, a man with a past marked by war and pain? What did the wolf see in him? And what did she expect from him? As the pup nestled in his arms, the soldier felt a shift inside himself. It was as if the past and the future had merged in that single moment, and there was no turning back. He didn't know what would come next, but one thing was certain. From that day on, his life would take an unexpected turn, a path he could never have predicted. John stood there, motionless in the middle of the field, with the pup in his arms, still processing everything that had just happened. The wolf, with her penetrating eyes and unshakable demeanor, had trusted him in a way he could never have imagined. And now, he was faced with a dilemma that seemed more complex than any war he had ever fought. What to do with this small creature? The pup, with its warm and fragile body, snuggled into his arms, seeking comfort, unaware of the weight of the situation. It didn't know, but the soldier did. The pup was completely vulnerable. The wolf had done her part, but now it was up to him. It was a responsibility he couldn't ignore. John took a deep breath, looking at the small animal now under his care. He couldn't deny the reflection he saw in that helpless little creature. Loneliness. The loneliness he felt every day in his life, ever since leaving the war behind. The loneliness he never knew how to fill, despite trying every day to convince himself that he was at peace. Now, there, with the pup in his arms, something inside him was awakening. But he knew that the decision he made would change everything in his life. The soldier looked toward the forest, where the wolf had disappeared, and a question echoed in his mind. Am I doing the right thing? The wolf was a wild creature, with instincts far sharper than a man's. She knew what was best for her cub. She had trusted him. But what if she came back? What if the pup, now in his care, became unpredictable and wild, like its mother? He knew that dealing with a wild animal wouldn't be easy. And the question that tormented him was, what if I fail? But, on the other hand, something inside him told him he couldn't just leave the pup there, at the mercy of nature. The wolf had done her part, but now, he was the only one who could decide the fate of that small life. How could he leave it behind? How could he abandon the silent trust of the wolf? He couldn't. Something inside him told him this was the opportunity he had been searching for, the opportunity for something more, something other than loneliness, something that would give him purpose again. John sat down on the wooden bench of the porch and held the pup tighter in his arms. He looked up at the sky, the clouds moving slowly, as if time were slowing down, waiting for his decision. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Caring for a wild pup wasn't like caring for a dog. It was a responsibility greater than he ever imagined. But in that moment, doubt was replaced by a sense of clarity. He knew he couldn't leave that pup behind. Life had placed him in front of a choice, and he couldn't turn back. The soldier looked at the pup one more time and, with a deep sigh, made his decision. "I will take care of you," he murmured to the small creature in his arms, as if making a promise. "I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll try. I'll do what I can." But he didn't know what lay ahead. He didn't know if the wolf would return, or if her act of trust was something he could sustain. Doubt still hung in the air. What if the pup wasn't as gentle as it seemed? And, more importantly, what would happen with the wolf? Would she accept that the soldier cared for her cub? Or would he have to face something much bigger than he had imagined? John knew he didn't have all the answers, but the one thing he knew for sure was that his life, from that moment on, would be different. The soldier had made a decision, and that decision would lead him down an unpredictable path. He was about to become something he had never imagined he'd be, a caretaker of a wild creature. But what he didn't know, and what he was about to discover, was that this act of caring for a pup, of embracing a responsibility he never imagined he'd have, would forever change the course of his life. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he felt that something extraordinary was about to happen. Weeks had passed since John decided to care for the wolf's pup. Slowly, the soldier and the small animal adapted to life together. The pup grew, becoming stronger, more agile, and the routine, which at first seemed like a heavy burden, was now becoming a kind of silent bond between the two. John's loneliness, which once consumed him, began to be softened by the presence of the pup, and he felt that, in some way, he had a purpose again. But despite that, there always lingered a quiet doubt. What about the mother? The wolf? Would she return? He knew it would be hard for her to accept that the pup was with him. But, with each passing day, the idea of a possible reunion with the wolf grew more distant, a concern he tried, but couldn't fully shake. It was on a cold autumn morning, while the pup slept peacefully under the soft sunlight, that John heard a sound coming from the forest. It was a gentle, but constant movement, like light footsteps among the dry leaves. John's heart raced. He stood up immediately. Fear and anxiety took over his body, as a wave of tension surrounded him. What would he do if the wolf came for the pup? What if she was aggressive? The footsteps drew closer. He remained motionless, his eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. The pup, unaware of the situation, was still sleeping, oblivious to what was about to happen. Suddenly, a powerful figure emerged at the edge of the forest. John froze for a moment. There she was, the wolf. Her eyes, penetrating and full of ancient wisdom, were fixed on him. She had returned. The soldier felt the weight of the situation. His body was tense, as if he had returned to a battlefield. But, to his surprise, the wolf did not advance aggressively as he had feared. She just stood there, watching him, her eyes never leaving the soldier. Time seemed to stand still. The tension was palpable, but something was different now. There were no signs of anger or threat. It was as if she was simply fulfilling a role that was still open. John watched, unsure of what to do, waiting for her to make a move, any sign that he should react. But instead, the wolf simply watched him. And then, with an impressive serenity, she stepped a little closer. John was speechless, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew this moment was crucial, that his actions now would be decisive for the future of both of them, him and the pup. The soldier took a deep breath, preparing for anything. But then the wolf did something unexpected. She looked at the pup, still asleep in the soldier's arms, and then, without haste, gave one last look at John, as if she were assessing the situation. She didn't seem angry, she didn't seem fearful, just calm. It was as if she knew her mission was complete. She no longer needed anything. The pup was safe. He had done his part, and with a lightness almost ethereal, the wolf turned around. Without a word, without a growl, she disappeared again into the forest, as silent as she had appeared. John stood there, motionless, still processing what had just happened. He looked at the pup in his arms, the small, helpless creature now safe in his care. He wondered what it all meant. Why hadn't the wolf fought to reclaim her pup? Why had she simply handed him over and left, without asking for anything more? It was as if, In that gesture, the wolf had completed a mission much bigger than he could yet fully understand. She had entrusted the life of her young one to him, and somehow, it seemed as though she knew the pup would be in good hands. And now, the feeling that overtook John was something he couldn't describe. It was as if he had become part of something much bigger, a connection to nature that he had never imagined possible. Something extraordinary had happened in that moment. He knew that from then on, his life would never be the same. The soldier, who had once felt lost and lonely, now felt that he was fulfilling a purpose, a role he had never known he had. The pup was more than just a responsibility. It was a chance for redemption, a path to something deeper. And as the wolf disappeared into the vastness of the forest, John finally understood. He was no longer alone. He had been chosen for something much greater, and his journey was just beginning. Before we continue, if you're feeling inspired by what you've heard so far, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This way, you can help more people discover stories like this, ones that touch the heart and remind us of the importance of acting with kindness, even in the most unexpected situations. As the weeks turned into months, John began to notice deep changes within himself. The man who had once spent his days lost in his own thoughts, immersed in the memories of war and the solitude of the field, now found himself different. Something in his heart had shifted. He wasn't sure if it was the pup that had given new meaning to his life, or if it was nature itself, with its quiet and wild presence, that had transformed the way he saw the world. But one thing was certain: he would never be the same. The pup grew quickly. The first weeks had been fragile and filled with uncertainties, but now he ran across the fields with an energy that reminded John of his mother, the wolf. His paws were strong, his fur shone under the sun, and he seemed as imposing as his mother, a wild beast who, paradoxically, was cared for by a man who had never imagined that he would play such an important role in another being's life. John began to notice something strange and beautiful happening around him. He was no longer isolated. Though he lived in the countryside, far from civilization, he felt a deeper connection to the world around him. Every morning, when he woke up, he heard the sounds of the forest, the birds singing, the rustling of the leaves, the sound of trees swaying in the wind, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He felt like he was part of something bigger, something that connected him to the very essence of life. The soldier began to walk through the forest with a new purpose. His confidence reflected in every step. He observed the animals with a fresh perspective. No longer did he see them merely as wild and distant creatures, but as companions of nature, each with its own stories, challenges, and desires. He began to understand what it truly meant to live in harmony with nature, with its unchanging cycles and raw beauty. The pup, now stronger and more independent, became a kind of symbol for him, representing not just survival, but the beauty of connection and care. And it was through this connection with the pup that John discovered something he had never imagined: the joy of caregiving. The soldier was no longer just existing. He was living in a way he had never felt before. The pup gave him reasons to wake up each day, to fight for his own transformation, to make his solitude something productive, something full of meaning. The wolf's kindness, in her silent gesture of entrusting her pup to John, had planted a seed in the soldier's heart. He now saw himself in a new role, no longer just a man marked by war, but someone capable of generosity, someone able to give and devote himself to something greater than himself. He had chosen the more difficult path, that of caring for a wild pup. But that decision, that selfless act, had ended up changing his own view of courage and strength. John now saw the world in an entirely new way. He understood that true courage wasn't about facing the enemies of war, but about caring, protecting, and, most importantly, connecting with what is simplest and most true. He began to see the bonds between humans and animals in a way he hadn't understood before. To him, nature was no longer just a backdrop, but a reflection of his own journey of transformation. The impact of this decision wasn't just emotional, it was a profound shift in the way he viewed life. The soldier now believed, more than ever, that our selfless actions, those that challenge us and pull us out of our comfort zone, have the power to transform us in ways we could never have anticipated. Sometimes, what seems like a simple act of care can return our own humanity to us in a way that nothing else could. And so, while the pup continued to grow strong and healthy by his side, John discovered that the impact of his decision to care for that helpless creature was far greater than he had ever imagined. The act of protecting and caring for a wildlife didn't just transform him, but also restored in him a lost connection, a connection with the very heart of life itself. This story reminds us that sometimes a simple act of kindness can completely change someone's path. The soldier, who was once marked by war and loneliness, has now found a renewed purpose, something he never imagined possible. He unexpectedly discovered that the most powerful bonds don't come just from words or human actions, but from a genuine connection with another being, even if that being comes from a world as distant and wild as that of the wolf and her pup. What did he learn? That true courage isn't about fighting visible enemies, but about doing what's right, acting with kindness and empathy, even when the world doesn't expect it from you. The soldier, now stronger, wiser, teaches us that we should never underestimate the power of a true connection, especially when it comes from where we least expect it. He never imagined that a simple gesture from a wolf, entrusting her pup to him, would change his life forever. But in the end, that's exactly what happened. And what would you do if you were in this soldier's shoes? How would you react to an opportunity to do good, even when everything seems uncertain? The question lingers, waiting for everyone to reflect on their own journey and on the power of small yet powerful decisions.